So, good afternoon, and welcome back, and welcome to all our friends who are participating in the retreat through the internet. I was saying earlier that as we enter into Holy Week, we are opening ourselves to a kind of experience that we call a religious experience. That's basically why we're here. But of course there are a lot of people in the world today who are very suspicious of religious experience and even hostile to what we call religious experience. There's quite a lot of prejudice against religion and even spirituality in many institutions, and with some good reason, because not all religious experience is authentic religious experience. And of course, when you say that, you set yourself up for something of a value judgment, and maybe it might sound as if you're condemning other people's experience, but I don't think that is the point. The point is that we can recognize, as Jesus himself indicated, different kinds of religion, and therefore different kinds of religious experience. After the Second World War, many societies in the Pacific were thrown into some trauma when the Western soldiers, or the American soldiers probably, withdrew. And they withdrew all the material goods that they had brought with them, and which these traditional, maybe primitive societies had learnt to get used to and to enjoy. And suddenly the troops were gone and the flow of consumer goods was no longer there. And this gave rise to a phenomenon, kind of a fairly modern phenomenon, I suppose, in terms of religion, called the cargo cult, which is where a traditional, less developed society tries to repeat the good days of its material prosperity after the source of that prosperity has departed. So what many of these Pacific Islanders did was to build imitation landing strips or imitation planes in order to repeat, by magic of course, to repeat their earlier good fortune. And although that kind of magic might seem to us rather primitive, we're not so far removed from it ourselves. We have, all of us, I think, however developed we may think we are, rational, scientific, there's a little bit of the magic seeker or magic user in all of us, particularly when we're under stress. We will try anything. And it's latent even in those who are not religious at all. I was, in fact, walking down the road a few days ago here on Bere Island, and somebody who's not particularly religious said hello. We were having a chat, and I said, hoping that this good weather will last. And she said, well, that's your department, isn't it? So it took me a moment to realize what she meant. So I was the priest in charge of getting good weather, closer to God, even though she doesn't believe in God. But so there's a little bit of it latent in all of us, and that latent magic can be aroused by need, by stress, by crisis, by fear, when we reach out for help and we're prepared to go into subtle realms of experience if the material realms of experience don't seem to be providing the answer. If the doctors can't provide the answer, or the bank manager can't provide the answer, then you'll try anything. So, in other words, there are different kinds of religious experience, and the kind of religious experience that we're focusing on in a meditation retreat in Holy Week is, I hope, not a magic-based, but a faith-based kind of religious experience. So let's just look briefly at what we might mean by religious experience. The word religion comes, of course, from a phrase that means to relink, religare, to reconnect with. And the question is, what are we relinking to? And what do we feel disconnected from? Somewhere deep within the human being, there is a feeling of disconnection. There is a hunger for something, a need, an unfulfilled need. And this is perhaps, certainly for believers, this is the sign, this is the symptom of our innate longing for God. St. Bernard speaks about the soul having a divine gravity, that at a material level we have a physical gravity, of course, but in the spiritual realm, our soul is gravitating naturally towards God as our true center. And this is a force of nature, in the same way as gravity and other forces in the universe are operating, have to be taken account of. So at this more subtle level, less measurable level of our being, we are also engaged with this force that pulls us towards God and is not satisfied until it connects, until it feels connected. And we may try many substitutes for this gravity, for this hunger for God. We may try anything, success or fame or money or anything that satisfies us at a sensory level or intellectual knowledge. We can lust in a way. Maybe that is what lust is. You can lust for power, you can lust for money, you can lust for sex, you can lust for anything that could compensate for a perceived lack and would be a false god in that case, kind of a cargo cult. And you would be setting yourself up for a lower level of religious experience and a lower level of human fulfillment, because this substitute God, this substitute gravity or hunger, is always going to disappoint us. It's never going to tick the box that we need to be filled. And I think that dealing with this innate and inevitable hunger or force, we try different ways of satisfying it and of reducing its demands on us. In other words, we may project some of that need for God, that hunger for God, for wholeness, for completion, onto a job, or onto a person, or onto a family, or onto a community, or onto some achievement or goal that you want to reach. And then the rest of that energy that still needs to be absorbed might be projected into a kind of religious experience that is at a lower level of demand. In other words, it becomes a religion of security, a cozy religion, a religion that reinforces the boundaries in which you are happy to live and feel secure. Religion as a place where people who are frightened of the demands of reality retreat into a safe kind of fortress, a safe inward-looking community, or a secure kind of homeland security where we feel that we are huddled with like-minded people and the outside world is kept at bay by our combined identity. So that's one kind of religious experience, and I think that kind of religious experience we would probably not be able to defend for very long or to find satisfying. Holy Week reminds us that being religious is not easy. Religious experience of an authentic kind is not the result of a performance that we can predict the result of. True religious experience is not related to the roles we play in a theatre production, whether it's the roles of clergy or laity or women or children, all of whom in most conventional forms of religion have a particular role that they should play, prescribed by that particular form of religion. It will vary from one religion to another or from one church to another, what roles you may play. But the kind of religious experience that leads to a fulfillment of the human person transcends those roles altogether. So, in other words, you could really say that true religious experience bursts the bonds of anything we can call religion. It's the end of religion, in a sense, or at least of formal religion. That doesn't mean to say that well, we'll come back to what may be the role of religion in that case, if that is true. Why bother with anything religious? And we are being religious, or we're going to be religious in a few days as we perform these sacred and beautiful rituals. But what's the point of that then? If the purpose of religious experience is to transcend all of it. And this seems to be exactly what Christianity is about. It's precisely in the person of Jesus, and we see this described, illustrated graphically in the Holy Week story, the Passion narrative especially. In Jesus we see a kind of religious experience that may well be supported or nurtured at a certain stage by a religious superstructure and a religious environment, but ultimately is free of it at the same time, ultimately transcends it. So that the risen Christ, that's the human person of Jesus, utterly fulfilled, who has reconnected, that need for God has been completely integrated. In the risen Christ, there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. So all of the categories into which religion makes us fit and play our roles, and society does too, are suspended or transcended. They're just not there. And all the basic categories, even the gender categories, and the social categories, and the religious categories, are all have all become transparent, diaphanous, and no longer able to control us. So It's this kind of religious experience, then, that is quite frightening. And no wonder that we try to domesticate it, and that religion, which is supposed to be set up to facilitate this fulfilling experience of transcendence, religion itself very often becomes a form of supporting the status quo. Religious people, religious institutions, religious forms frequently support the structures of society, the gender relations, the forms of life, which in themselves cry out for transformation or for justice. How often has religion collaborated with political and economic forces of oppression to keep the poor in their place? So perhaps the reason for this is that the pure nature of religious experience is quite terrifyingly revolutionary. And this is what we see happening in these days of Holy Week as we follow the story of Jesus in his final days. The God that we were worshipping through those religious forms is exposed as a false God. And therefore everything that God justified is destabilized. Everything has its support system stripped away. That the God we find in this new space, which is the Holy Week space, the space in which Jesus enters into through his loss of status, through his suffering, through his isolation, through all the things that we don't want to happen to us, that the God that Jesus enters into this space is a very different kind of God. Not the God we thought we would be finding. Religion then, if it is to lead us to genuine religious experience and not become corrupt, not become compromised along the way, true religion then is a kind of a catalyst. It's not an end in itself. In the book of Revelation it says, there is no temple in the heavenly Jerusalem. God, the light is God. God is the light of everything. There is only God. There is no separate sacred space. There is no temple in the heavenly Jerusalem. So religion then is a catalyst which has a very important role to play in human society and in our personal lives. Our lives are less rich, less deep, less informed if we have no religious dimension, no religious belief, no religious experience. And this is why we would hope that children are given a training in their religious experience early in life and given a religious tradition. Because without that, our response to the big experiences of life, of loss, of death, of love, or marriage, or children, it's very difficult to express the full meaning, the full wonder, the full depth, or the full joy, or the full grief of those experiences without the religious framework. I'm saying it's impossible, but it's certainly easier, I think, if you do. And you see often people struggling, people who have no religious language or no religious information, no tradition. You see them struggling to understand and express deep experience in life that has overwhelmed them but seems to be inexpressible. So authentic religious experience is like a catalyst. It's a way of speeding up and focusing our human journey. And it allows us to see that we are spiritual beings on a human journey. That our human experience happens to us in order to develop our spiritual fulfillment, our spiritual meaning. The purpose of religious experience, then, is to awaken every cell in our being to a full perception of what we are part of. We heard in the text that we looked at this morning and spoke about, we heard Jesus 3 times call on the disciples just to stay awake. That was all. Not to make any judgments, not to have any answers, not to perform any rituals, but just to stay awake. To stay awake through the good and the bad times in life, and not to seek the cargo cult, not to seek the easy escape, not to seek the weaker option, but to allow every cell in our being to stay and live in this wakeful condition. And I think Christians especially, who find their definitive understanding and experience of God in Jesus, need to understand this function, or this as the nature of religion. And in a sense, as I said, Jesus points us through and beyond the religious dimension of our journey. He certainly points us beyond false images of God and false securities. And this is why, when we look at Jesus' teaching on prayer, what is the purpose of religion without prayer? It'd be a very odd kind of religion that didn't have any prayer in it. What are you praying for? Good weather? That's my department. Or for some other benefits that you hope some magical formula will produce for you. But if we look at Jesus' teaching on prayer, we don't find that kind of magic at all. We find a very distilled and pure and simple teaching on faith. And we see that very clearly his teaching on prayer, and this comes from a person who went to the synagogue and obeyed most of the rules of his religion and went to the temple and was a religious person. But his teaching on prayer is contemplative. He doesn't speak about religious forms, religious language, religious formulas. He speaks about interiority and silence and trust and freedom, the freedom of the mind from anxiety and worry, of mindfulness, of concentration, attention, and of living in the present moment. These qualities of his teaching add up, of course, to what we are trying to practice in every meditation. Interiority and trust and silence. We're not babbling on, thinking that the more we say, the more likely we are to get good weather, or to win the lottery, or to have a long life, prosperity, fertility, and what's the other thing we all want? What is it? I think that's it, maybe.
Fertility.
What? Fertility.
Equality.
Equality, yes. So, anyway, so this is the teaching of Jesus on prayer. And it shows us why meditation needs to be central to any Christian spiritual journey, in some form or other. If we're following his teaching, we should be trying to put it into practice. It is so easy for us to worship the ideas and the imagery produced by religion as means to an end, as if they were ends in themselves. Meditation interrupts that process. It stops that tendency in its tracks. And like any tendency, which is as deep-rooted as that, because it flows from the ego's need for security, coziness, and control, the ego, of course, is going to reactivate itself very quickly. Our moods change very rapidly. We forget what we learnt very quickly. And we revert to bad habits. And so we need meditation, not just as an intensive course, but we need it as a regular practice, just as we need good nutrition. Otherwise, we're a little like people who get addicted to junk food and they go and have a McDonald's and double fries and Big Mac double portion and so on, and then to make themselves feel better they'll order a Diet Coke. So you actually have to, we have to get the nutrition balanced and regular. Some of these images of God, though, that we have to dissolve and allow to be shattered in our meditation, some of these images are very deep. These images of God, a God, for example, who is capable of condemning us. A very deep image for many people, maybe not so much for this generation emerging now, but maybe even worse images of God might have crept into their minds through cartoons and with the lack of any kind of religious instruction or formation. The idea of God is still present in some form. But for people of an older generation, then the images of God that we learnt in childhood or absorbed through our culture can be very deeply negative and deeply rooted and deeply false to the tradition itself, to the teaching of Jesus. Also, along with every image of God that we have to expose, there is an image of self associated. Because every image of God is a kind of projection of the ego or the superego. There's quite a lot of the ego in all our images of God. And we can get our image of God, to do things for us that we would be embarrassed to do ourselves, like killing people, or condemning people, or feeling superior to people. So, along with our images of God, we have to scan our image of self, and that's what is happening automatically in the work of meditation. There's a scanning going on. It's picking up any viruses and any images of God or of self related to it, which need to be put right. And perhaps at the deepest level, below these images, the meditation, the contemplative work, is also penetrating that level of self-knowledge which we have to open, and this is what religious experience means, that level of self-knowledge which needs to be healthy and activated if we are to know God. So once the image of God has been, as it were, tidied up, and the images of self related to it have been cleared up, the idea, for example, that we are not worthy to be loved. Very common in many religious people, that they're really not lovable. They may be redeemable, but they're not lovable. So what kind of redemption are we headed for then if we're not lovable? We think that redemption and love are different things, even though our human experience Our psychological experience tells us something different or suggests something different, that we are in fact redeemed by love, but our religious mind makes a distinction between the two. I'm not really lovable, God could never love me, but maybe if I'm lucky, God will redeem me. So our meditation is a very powerful dissolving agent. It dissolves these encrusted images of God and of self, and which block our true self-knowledge and therefore block true religious experience. And meditation then throws us open to a religious experience that is not limited to the forms of religion, but which transcends the categories even of the sacred and the profane, the sacred and the secular. That's why the meditator may indeed be a very religious person, but they are religious in a way that is inclusive and expanding, and expands that experience of God, which is what religious experience means, that experience of God into more and more of the secular sphere of life. And so I think the meditator, or the person entering into this level of experience, really just doesn't take the hard and fast divisions between religious and secular seriously. Recognize that we go to church on certain occasions, we do things there that we don't do outside, but actually the level of experience is not controlled by those categories. I was given some scallops the other day, and I had to take them out of their shells, and it's quite an art to doing that. It's quite difficult at first and quite messy if you've ever done it. You have to get the shells are closed and tightly closed, and you have to, sorry this is going to make you squirm, you have to put the knife in and you wiggle it around and until you find the little muscle, not the little tendon that keeps the shell closed, and you have to cut that, and then it springs open, and then you see the beautiful, luscious scallop inside. Then you have to take some of the messy bits away that you don't want to eat, and you are now able to celebrate your part in the great food chain of life. So I think in the same way, in meditation, the mantra is also seeking that that tendon of the ego that keeps us closed, that prevents us from opening to the true God and to true life, to true religious experience. And at first it's quite difficult to find that part which it needs to sever. But it does find it eventually, and it's a wonderful moment when you feel free, when the ego where you're free from the closed function of the ego, and it becomes an open function. Our meditation, in the same way, opens us to an experience which spills over from the time of meditation itself. You don't even know, perhaps, you're having this experience during the meditation. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But you're not concerned about what you're getting out of the meditation period. That would be an ego judgment. But you are simply doing the work, trying to find it. And the work is is not an anxious, destructive work. The work is the work of attention. It's ultimately a loving work. That's why that image may not be the best image, but it's a loving work, a gentle work, but it is a very faithful work. And it reminds us over and over again that that every authentic religious experience expands our capacity for love. So, we'll take a few moments just to stretch and refresh and stay quiet. Maybe have some music. And those who are still with us online might like to stay with us as we listen to the music. And then we'll move into meditation in a few moments. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Stretch, this is fine to do. We'll take a little time after the meditation for some discussion or questions if you